This time on Between the Wheels.
I inherited this car from my late dad. He passed about 6 years ago. So once he passed, we decided to restore it in memoriam. Maybe in his head he knew that one day I would drive this. He was like, okay, now you're gonna learn how to drive manual. So I get a lot of looks, obviously, when I drive this, just because it's a spectacle of a car, I would say. Like, just the blue and the shape of it, it's like very memorable, and everyone's always surprised when they look in the driver's side window and then they see me driving it, because I guess they're expecting something else.
Bought it in 1983 for $100 in a used washer and dryer.
He asked me questions like, is it fast?
You really don't have to say much.
Just enjoy the ride.
If Dominic Toretto is a real person, definitely be you.
So when I was 14, actually, I found this on Kijiji.
I was literally in the garage anywhere from 6 to 12 hours.
Decided to make a race car out of it. Let's see what happens here.
So the whole trip, I got pulled over 12 times.
So I'm standing here at beautiful White Lake. This is probably one of the nicest locations we've been here. And we're standing here with Sarah and her 1975 Datsun. Tell us about this car.
So I inherited this car from my late dad. He passed about 6 years ago. So once he passed, we decided to restore it in memoriam. It had been sitting in my childhood home's garage for since the early 90s, I believe, was the last time that it drove. And so it just sat there. It has like 27,000 miles on it. And a local guy named Sean Getty, who runs a garage, came, picked it up on a trailer and hauled it back to his shop, and he worked on it, I believe, for about a year. And he made it as it was back when it ran.
Wow, that's amazing. That's such a cool story. And this thing had very low miles, so it was already in a pretty good shape to begin with.
Yeah.
But so what's the story with your dad? Why is this car so significant to your family? How did this come into the family?
I believe he bought it in 1975, fresh off the lot. I just talked to my mom. She said he bought it from Dilawri.
Oh, cool, yeah.
So he bought it after he finished his bachelor's of engineering at Carleton University. And so it was between the time of finishing that and then just about to start his master's in engineering. And so it was the only time that they could afford it, so they ended up buying it. And it was always his dream to have kind of like a little sporty car, so he decided to just pull the trigger. And he obviously babied it. He didn't really drive it too much, hence the low mileage. But yeah, it's been in the family for a long time, and I just always remember it sitting in the garage and playing around in it as a kid, and it still smells the same as when I was a kid when I get into it, so it's nice nostalgia there.
That's cool. That's always nice to have like a physical connection with the past. And this car is also very unique because it was part of your parents' wedding.
I have an old photo of them, and they actually decorated it with flowers and streamers and stuff, and they were married in 1978, I believe, so they used it as their vehicle driving away from their ceremony, which is kind of a nice little memory for them.
Oh, that's really, really cool. It's great to have a memory of your dad like this and do this basically a tribute to him. And what made you kind of pull the trigger in terms of restoring it and bringing it to the shape it's in now, rather than just leaving it the way it was before?
Well, I mean, it's such a beautiful car, so it just seemed like a shame to let it just kind of sit as a time capsule in the garage. And I just feel like listening to the engine purr the first time once it was restored was like kind of like bringing him back to life in a way, or at least his memories. So
absolutely.
I thought it would be a nice little tribute for him, because he was always kind of a petrol head and like looking up cars on Auto Trader and like going to test drive stuff. So it was a nice way to commemorate him.
You probably wouldn't be into this if it wasn't for him, right? Is this something that brought you guys together?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I remember the morning of my 16th birthday, he just kicked me out of bed earlier in the morning. He's like, you're going to do your driver's license test. And I was like, what? Okay. And so he was like really always adamant about me being independent and being able to drive myself around. And then once I got my license, he was like, okay, now you're going to learn how to drive manual. So then he sent me for lessons to do that. I guess maybe in his head he knew that one day I would drive this. I'm not really sure, but it all worked out in the end.
That's really, really cool. And what was the restoration process like? How long did it take? What were kind of the steps that they went through?
I think the process took about a year. As I said, Sean Getty came to pick it up on a trailer because it hadn't run for so long and the fuel lines had to be drained. It was like the same liquids in it for I don't even know how long. And so basically the engine was completely removed and hand rebuilt and shipped off to Toronto to be restored. And then he just cleaned everything up, replaced all the old parts and made it run as it was back in the day. He didn't like soup it up or anything or make it new in any way. So it just kind of ran as it did back in the 70s.
And what type of specs does this car have, like in terms of the engine and the horsepower?
Yeah, so I believe it's 170 horsepower. It's a 2.8 liter engine, inline 6, and it's fuel injected, which I think was kind of rare for a car of its age. So it's kind of interesting. It's also manual, and it only has one mirror, which I guess was a thing back in the day, which is always kind of interesting to drive once I'm in it because I'm like reflexively trying to look for the other mirror, but it's just not there.
But that's pretty cool that this was from 75 and it had fuel injection. So this is definitely the early days. So that's the beginning of fuel injection, which is really, really neat. So, and we were kind of starting this thing off camera and I couldn't believe how easily this thing turned on. So that's obviously the thing, the fuel injection versus carburetor. The carburetor, you have to pump the gas and kind of, you know, prime it there, whereas this is just fired right up. So, and how often do you drive this now?
I mean, now that I store it at my mom's place in White Lake just a few times a year, and you know, with the Canadian weather, you never know what it's going to be like. Sometimes it'll rain or we'll have a tornado. So if I'm lucky, I'll get it maybe 5 times a year in the summer.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you drive this thing, what's the feeling you get when you drive in the car knowing that this was your dad's and has all the history? What's that like?
I mean, I kind of feel like it's like a small part of him and it brings me closer to him and I'm literally reliving his memory and it just feels like a nice car to drive. The way the engine kind of purrs, it sounds really cool when you start it up and when you're just kind of booting around town. And it's just funny because I get a lot of looks, obviously, when I drive this just because it's a spectacle of a car, I would say. Like just the blue and the shape of it, it's like very memorable and everyone's always surprised when they look in the driver's side window and then they see me driving it because I guess they're expecting something else.
Well, at the same time, this is what's really cool about the story. You're actually the first female to be on the show. So this is really cool and it's awesome sharing your story with your dad.
I still sometimes dream of him, which is nice. I feel like it's him visiting me, but like I said earlier, like when I get into the car, that smell kind of like transports me instantly back to childhood. Because I remember he actually used to drive one of my brothers and I, we would be in that back, the boot, I guess, which is not really a seat, but you know, things were different back then.
Yeah, there isn't a seat back there, that's true, right? The boot, that's awesome.
I really remember being back there as a kid and him driving around the neighborhood, which was really fun.
That's so like 80s and 90s, I love it. Definitely did
built
that too.
Different.
Yeah, built different. We didn't have seat belts, things like that. Now you pretty much get arrested as soon as that happens, so you can't really pull that off. With all that said, I think the next thing to do is actually take this thing on the road and go for a drive.
For sure.
It's nice to have it manual too.
Yeah.
How do you like driving manual?
I like it. It's kind of like playing a video game, but you actually are doing something real.
That's true, like playing a video game, but so much better.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you just feel like you're like more attuned with the car, right? You can feel it like shaking, you can feel the RPMs, you can listen to it. It's like a whole body experience.
I have a hard time explaining to people manual, like why would you ever want it? They're like, oh, it's so much more work. It
Which
is
is the best part.
But that's the part that makes it fun.
Exactly.
You also have ultimate control of your vehicle. You have perfect, you know what's going
You're
on.
on a hill, you need to brake.
But this thing, you have to work a little harder because you actually have manual steering in this. You don't
Yes.
have power steering.
It is an arm workout.
Yeah. Now this is a beautiful drive you got here.
Yeah, beautiful trees. It's actually beautiful year round.
This was a huge part of your father's life, obviously. It's a big part of your life now. And you actually have 2 daughters.
Yes.
Do you plan to have this car part of their lives? Like, do you have anything in mind that you think, oh yeah, I want to teach them how to drive standard?
For sure, yeah. I think it'll be important for them to learn, and I'm really adamant that they get a license when they're of age, because it's such a good life skill to have, and just to be able to drive yourself somewhere in case of emergencies or otherwise, right?
And that's something we've never actually talked about on the show, is actually having the ability to drive manual.
Exactly.
It's just a good thing to have. It's like knowing more languages. It's just more useful.
Exactly, and if you ever travel, you know, it's a great skill to have, because some places it's just more prevalent there, so you want to know how to do it.
Absolutely.
You know, say your friend, you know, can't drive and their car's manual, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Yeah, but at least you have the skill to do that. And so when you have your friends come in here, obviously your friends know that you've had this for a long time, but maybe when you have new people coming, are they ever thrown off by the fact that, hey, this is a manual car, you know, driving car of this age? Like, what's people's reactions when you first have them in this car usually?
I think they're just usually taken with how nice the car looks and how happy they are to be able to ride in it. And then, you know what, I always insist, like, hey, do you want to drive it? And most of them will bite, because actually most of my friends do drive standard. I don't know if it's like a generational thing. So yeah, they love being able to take it for a spin, and they're just like so hyped after.
Nice. I don't blame them. You can't beat driving in Canada this time of year, especially with a nice old car.
Yeah, on some like beautiful windy roads.
Yeah.
It's funny, I get stopped a lot when I drive it in the city, and then people always ask me, oh, is it for sale? Is it for sale? Are you selling it? And I said, no, I will never sell this car. It's effectively a family heirloom. It's priceless, right? How can you put a dollar amount on something that has so much sentimental value? Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool to imagine the fact that you're driving this right now, and to think your dad was driving this back in the 70s, the same way you did right now.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really cool. And the car is an amazing shape. You guys did a great job. The restoration was awesome. Everything's pristine in here.
Yeah.
But it's not, you didn't do any modifications in terms of performance or doing something over the top. It doesn't look stupid, other than changing the rims and the wheels.
Exactly.
Those were,
which I had to, just because the tire size doesn't exist anymore.
Right. But other than that, it's pretty much the way it was, which is really cool, because it's nice to see a car that hasn't been modified. It's kind of rare these days, so this is definitely a time capsule in more ways than one.
For sure. He still has little trinkets from back in the day, like the tag from when he bought it off the lot, and his old parking pass from Carleton University in the 70s, and the manuals that are in the glove box.
Wow, so it is more of a time capsule even than just the year and the age and whatnot.
Yeah, it's like a museum.
That's pretty cool. Well, listen, Sarah, thank you so much for being on the show and giving us a ride in your car and telling your amazing story. Everybody that's on the show gets a hat, so that's no different. Here's your hat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the show. This was awesome. It was such a cool ride, and I love seeing all the history basically being preserved and it being passed down. So
thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a great chat.
We'll see you guys next time.
Next time on Between the Wheels.
That's a nice color. It's a mix of puke green and piss yellow, ain't it? This thing at 140 kilometers an hour feels like you're re-entering on the space shuttle. Yeah. Crash potential? At 40 miles an hour, if you're gonna crash in this thing, you're friggin' dead. It's Ford in title and in appearance, but not so much Ford in execution. We believe it was the first electronically fuel-injected hot rod in Canada.
We gotta see the engine. What do you got under here?
For sure. I'll come around and I'll show you.